Long before the dawn of humanity, before the first temples were raised in marble and stone, the universe was ruled by a dynasty of primordial terror. The cosmos was a violent, untamed expanse, governed not by justice, but by absolute, unyielding power. High atop the jagged peaks of Mount Othrys, a king sat upon a throne forged from the suffering of his own blood. His name was Cronus, the lord of the Titans. He had seized the heavens by mutilating his own father, the sky god Uranus, casting the severed remnants of the old order into the boiling seas. But as Uranus bled out upon the earth, he had gasped a final, chilling prophecy. He cursed his son, declaring that just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would Cronus be overthrown by his own child. This single, whispered doom became the poison that infected the mind of the Titan king. It stripped away his triumph, replacing it with a cold, suffocating paranoia. To defy fate, Cronus committed an act of such unspeakable horror that it would echo through eternity, setting the stage for the greatest war the heavens had ever known. This is the story of the broken cosmos, the vengeance of a mother, and the rise of the Stormbringer. This is the story of Zeus and the cataclysmic war that shattered the world to forge a new one. The reign of the Titans was a time of magnificent brutality. They were beings of staggering scale and elemental fury, the physical embodiments of the earth, the light, the oceans, and the stars. Under the rule of Cronus, the world was supposedly locked in a golden age, a time of eternal spring where the earth gave forth its bounty without the need for toil. But this paradise was a fragile illusion, masking a court paralyzed by fear. Cronus had taken his sister, the beautiful and gentle Rhea, as his queen. Together, they were meant to populate the new age of the cosmos. Yet every time Rhea's belly swelled with life, the prophecy of Uranus echoed in the mind of the Titan king. He saw not children, but usurpers. He saw his own demise wrapped in swaddling clothes. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, a radiant daughter named Hestia, Cronus did not cradle her. Driven by a madness born of terror, he tore the infant from his wife's arms, unhinged his jaw, and swallowed the goddess whole. The immortal child could not die, but was instead condemned to the dark, suffocating prison of her father's stomach. Rhea's screams of agony went unanswered by the silent, towering walls of Mount Othrys. The other Titans watched in grim silence, bound by their loyalty to the king and their own fear of his wrath. The nightmare did not end. It became a monstrous ritual. When the goddess of the harvest, Demeter, was born, she was devoured. When the majestic Hera drew her first breath, she too was consumed. The sons met the same horrific fate. Hades, who would one day command the underworld, was swallowed into the darkness of his father's belly. Poseidon, the future lord of the seas, was devoured before he could ever see the ocean. 5 times Rhea gave birth, and 5 times she was left with empty arms and a shattered heart. The grief of the Titan queen was an abyss, a sorrow so profound it threatened to fracture the very foundations of the earth. But as her 6th pregnancy approached, that grief hardened into something far more dangerous. It hardened into cold, calculated defiance. Rhea could not bear to lose another child to the monstrous appetite of her husband. Desperate, she fled the oppressive halls of Mount Othrys under the cover of night, seeking the counsel of her mother, Gaia, the primordial earth. Gaia, who had also suffered under the cruelty of a tyrant husband, took pity on her daughter. She revealed a secret sanctuary, a place hidden from the all-seeing eyes of the Titans. Following her mother's guidance, Rhea traveled across the dark, churning seas to the wild and rugged island of Crete. Deep within the labyrinthine caverns of Mount Ida, surrounded by ancient forests and shadowed valleys, Rhea finally gave birth. The child was a son. He radiated a fierce, crackling energy. his eyes bright with the light of 1,000 unborn storms. She named him Zeus, but Rhea knew that Cronus would soon come looking for his heir. She could not stay to raise her son. With a heavy heart, she kissed the infant's forehead, leaving him in the care of the nymphs of the ash trees and a divine goat named Amalthea, who would nurse the young god with her magical milk. To protect the child from the sharp ears of his father, the Curetes, a band of fierce earthborn warriors, stood guard outside the cave. Whenever the infant Zeus would cry, the Curetes would clash their bronze spears against their massive shields, dancing wildly and shouting battle cries to drown out the sound, ensuring the noise never reached the throne of Mount Othrys. Rhea returned to the court of Cronus, her face a mask of feigned exhaustion and sorrow. When the Titan king demanded the newborn, Rhea presented him with a massive, smooth stone, the omphalos, carefully wrapped in thick, swaddling clothes. Blinded by his own paranoia and the routine of his atrocities, Cronus did not pause to examine the bundle. He snatched the stone from her hands and swallowed it whole, believing he had finally secured his eternal reign. He wiped his mouth, satisfied that the prophecy of Uranus was broken. He did not know that his doom was already breathing, growing stronger every day in the hidden caves of Crete. Years bled into decades, and decades into centuries. In the lush, shadowed wilderness of his island sanctuary, Zeus grew from a radiant infant into a towering figure of divine perfection. He possessed a physical strength that rivaled the mountains, and a mind as sharp and unpredictable as the lightning that danced across the Cretan skies. He learned the secrets of the earth, the shifting of the winds, and the deep, ancient magic of the world. But most importantly, he learned of his lineage. The nymphs whispered the tragic tale of his mother's sorrow, of the brothers and sisters trapped in the dark abyss of their father's stomach, and of the monstrous tyrant who ruled the cosmos. A cold, unyielding fury took root in the young god's heart. He realized that he was not merely a survivor, he was a weapon forged by destiny to shatter the old world. When Zeus finally reached the pinnacle of his youth, his power fully realized, he left the island of Crete. He did not march upon Mount Othrys with an army, for he knew that brute force alone could not topple the Titan king. He needed cunning. He needed allies. Disguising his divine radiance, Zeus infiltrated the grand halls of the Titans, taking the humble position of a cupbearer to his father. For a time, he moved silently through the towering obsidian corridors, observing the sheer, terrifying might of the Titan lords. He saw Atlas, whose strength could shatter continents, Hyperion, who radiated the blinding light of the primordial sun, and Iapetus, the lord of mortality. But he also saw their arrogance, their belief in their own invincibility. It was during this time, in the shadows, that Zeus sought out Metis, a second-generation Titan goddess of profound wisdom and deep, ancient cunning. Metis saw the fire of revolution in the young god's eyes and agreed to aid him. Together, they concocted a brilliant, dangerous plan. Metis gathered rare, potent herbs from the darkest corners of the earth, grinding them into a powerful, magical emetic, a potion designed to violently purge the stomach. The opportunity arose during a grand feast on Mount Othrys. The halls echoed with the booming laughter of the Titans, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat and heavy wine. Zeus, in his guise as the cupbearer, approached the throne of Cronus. With a steady hand that belied the thundering of his heart, he poured the dark, sweet nectar into the king's golden goblet, secretly mixing in the potion crafted by Metis. Cronus, suspecting nothing from a mere servant, took the goblet and drained it in a single massive gulp. The reaction was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The Titan king dropped the golden cup, his hands flying to his throat as his eyes widened in sudden, agonizing realization. A terrifying rumble echoed from deep within his massive chest, a sound like mountains tearing themselves apart. Cronus fell to his knees, clutching his stomach as the magical potion violently rebelled against his divine biology. With a sickening, earth-shattering heave, the king of the cosmos vomited. First came the Omphalos stone, the great rock that had deceived him years ago. It crashed onto the marble floor, cracking the ancient stone. Then the impossible happened. From the dark maw of the Titan king emerged the children he had swallowed so long ago. But they were no longer infants. Having grown to full divine maturity within their father's immortal stomach, they burst forth in a blinding flash of divine light. Out sprang Poseidon, his eyes dark and turbulent like a storm-tossed sea. Out came Hades, cloaked in an aura of cold, impenetrable shadows. Then came the goddesses, Hera, regal and burning with fury, Demeter, radiating the raw, untamed power of the earth, and finally Hestia, calm but absolute in her presence. The grand hall of Mount Othrys descended into absolute chaos. The Titans, caught completely off guard, reached for their weapons, but the newly freed gods did not linger. In a brilliant flash of light and a shockwave that shattered the pillars of the hall, Zeus revealed his true form. He stood alongside his brothers and sisters, their divine auras merging into a blinding beacon of rebellion. Before the Titans could rally their forces, the 6 siblings vanished from the hall, retreating to the highest peak in the mortal realm, Mount Olympus. The lines were drawn, the heavens were torn in two. On the dark, brooding peaks of Mount Othrys stood the Titans, the old guard, beings of immense, raw, primordial power. On the snow-capped, gleaming heights of Mount Olympus stood the new gods, driven by vengeance, justice, and the fiery will to forge a new order. The sky turned the color of bruised iron. The winds howled with the promise of slaughter. The Titanomachy had begun. This was not a war of men, where blood soaked the grass and bodies piled in the mud. This was a war of gods. When they clashed, the very fabric of reality groaned under the strain. The battlefields were not plains or valleys, but the entire face of the earth. The Titans ripped mountains from their roots and hurled them across the sky, blotting out the sun. The Olympians struck back with devastating force, their divine energy scorching the earth and boiling the seas. Forests the size of continents were reduced to ash in a matter of hours. The oceans rose in massive, continent-drowning tsunamis as Poseidon wrestled with the ancient water titans. The mortal creatures of the earth cowered in the deepest caves, praying for an end to the apocalyptic nightmare. For 10 agonizing years, the war raged without pause. The heavens were locked in a perpetual state of twilight, choked by the dust of pulverized mountains and the smoke of burning worlds. Despite the fierce determination of the Olympians, the war was a brutal, grinding stalemate. The Titans were older, larger, and possessed a terrifying, relentless endurance. No matter how hard Zeus and his siblings fought, they could not break the defensive lines of Mount Othrys. The earth was dying, cracking under the endless barrage of divine violence. Zeus realized that if the war continued like this, there would be nothing left to rule. He needed a power that could shatter the stalemate. He needed a force of absolute destruction. Once again, the ancient wisdom of Gaia intervened. The primordial Earth Mother, weary of the endless suffering of her surface, whispered a dark secret to the king of the Olympians. She told him of a power locked away in the deepest, most terrifying abyss of the cosmos. She told him to look to Tartarus. Tartarus was not merely a place, it was a primordial entity, a gulf of darkness so profound, so far beneath the earth, that an anvil dropped from the surface would fall for 9 days and 9 nights before striking its brazen floor. It was a prison of absolute despair, guarded by towering gates of bronze and wrapped in a triple layer of impenetrable night. It was here that Uranus, and later Cronus, had imprisoned their most monstrous offspring, fearing their hideous forms and unfathomable strength. These were the elder Cyclopes and the Hecaton Kyries, the 100-handers. Leaving the front lines of the war in the hands of his brothers, Zeus descended into the underworld. He bypassed the gloomy realms of the dead and plunged deeper into the crushing, suffocating blackness of Tartarus. The air grew thick with the smell of sulfur and ancient decay. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant, echoing groans of the imprisoned monsters. When Zeus finally reached the brazen gates, he did not hesitate. Drawing upon the full, terrifying might of his divine will, he shattered the unbreakable locks. The massive doors groaned open, unleashing a wave of stagnant, oppressive air. Stepping into the abyss, Zeus beheld the prisoners. The elder Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges were towering giants, each possessing a single, massive eye burning with the fire of the forge. Beside them were the Hecaton Kyries, Kotos, Briareos, and Gyges. They were nightmares of flesh and bone, mountains of muscle possessing 50 heads and 100 massive arms each. They had been chained in the dark for eons, their minds twisted by isolation, their hearts burning with a hatred for the Titan king who had left them to rot. Zeus did not look upon them with disgust. He looked upon them as brothers, as fellow victims of Cronus's cruelty. He struck the adamantine chains from their limbs, offering them the sweet taste of nectar and the revitalizing power of ambrosia. As the divine food flowed through their withered veins, their ancient, terrifying strength returned. Zeus spoke to them not as a master, but as a leader. He offered them revenge. He offered them the sky. In a surge of overwhelming gratitude and bloodlust, the monsters swore their eternal loyalty to the Olympian king. But the Cyclopes offered something more. They were the original master craftsmen of the cosmos, beings who understood the deep, chaotic magic of creation. To repay Zeus for their freedom, they gathered the raw, volatile essence of the underworld, the heat of the earth's core, and the furious energy of the sky. In the dark, roaring forges of Tartarus, they labored, their massive hammers striking sparks that illuminated the abyss. For Hades, they forged the Helm of Darkness, a terrifying artifact that could render the wearer completely invisible, even to the eyes of the gods. For Poseidon, they crafted the Trident, a massive, three-pronged spear capable of shaking the earth to its foundations and commanding the absolute fury of the oceans. And finally, for Zeus, they forged the ultimate weapon of cosmic authority. They captured the blinding flash of the storm, the deafening roar of the thunder, and the searing, destructive heat of the lightning. They bound these untamed forces into a physical form, creating the Master Bolt. When Zeus wrapped his hand around the crackling shaft of pure, concentrated energy, the entire abyss of Tartarus trembled. The air filled with the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. The weapon pulsed with a terrifying, apocalyptic light. Zeus was no longer just a god of the sky. He had become the storm itself. With his new allies and weapons of unimaginable power, Zeus ascended from the darkness. When he emerged onto the surface, the tide of the war shifted instantly. The final battle of the Titanomachy was not a mere skirmish. It was a cosmic execution. The sky above Thessaly turned a bruised, unnatural purple. The winds died down, replaced by a suffocating heavy silence. The Titans, gathered on the slopes of Mount Othrys, looked up and felt something they had never experienced in their immortal lives. They felt dread. The Olympians struck with flawless, devastating coordination. Hades, wearing the Helm of Darkness, slipped unseen through the Titan ranks. Like a phantom, he moved among the colossal warriors, destroying their weapons, sowing confusion, and striking fear into their hearts. Invisible and untouchable, he dismantled their defenses from the inside out. Suddenly, the ground beneath the Titan's feet violently heaved. Poseidon drove his mighty trident deep into the crust of the earth. The continents fractured. Massive fissures tore through the rock, swallowing entire forests. The mountains groaned and shattered as the Lord of the Seas unleashed a localized earthquake of unprecedented magnitude, knocking the towering titans off balance, leaving them vulnerable and disoriented. Then the sky tore open. Zeus stepped forward, hovering above the highest peak of Olympus. His eyes burned with a blinding, white-hot light. He raised his arm, and the heavens responded. The clouds swirled into a massive, churning vortex of black and purple. With a roar that dwarfed the sound of 1,000 collapsing mountains, Zeus hurled the master bolt. The lightning did not merely strike, it obliterated. It was a spear of pure, white-hot plasma that vaporized stone and turned the sand into glass. It slammed into the Titan lines with the force of a falling star. The shockwave flattened the landscape for hundreds of miles. The heat was so intense that the rivers instantly boiled dry and the oceans hissed, sending massive clouds of scalding steam into the atmosphere. Blinded and burning, the Titans screamed, their immortal flesh scorched by the raw power of the heavens. Zeus hurled bolt after bolt, a relentless, deafening barrage of divine wrath that turned the sky into a shattered mosaic of blinding light. But the assault was not over. From the flanks, the earth trembled with a new, rhythmic pounding. The Hecatoncheires had arrived. The 300 handers stood tall, their 300 massive arms moving in a blur of terrifying speed. They reached into the earth, tearing out boulders the size of cities. With a synchronized, devastating roar, they hurled the massive rocks into the air. 300 mountains blocked out the sun, casting a terrifying shadow over the Titan army before crashing down upon them in a relentless, pulverizing storm of stone. The combination of Hades' unseen terror, Poseidon's earth-shattering quakes, Zeus's blinding storms, and the crushing avalanche of the 100-handers broke the Titan lines. The sheer, overwhelming violence of the assault shattered their will. The old gods, who had ruled the cosmos for eons, were beaten, battered, and buried under the rubble of their own kingdom. Cronus, the tyrant king, fell to his knees. His golden armor was scorched black, his body crushed by the weight of the assault. He looked up at the sky, his eyes meeting the blazing, unforgiving gaze of the sun he had tried to destroy. The prophecy of Uranus had been fulfilled. The reign of the Titans was over. The aftermath of the battle was a landscape of unimaginable devastation. The earth was scarred, smoking, and silent. But the Olympians did not offer mercy. To ensure that the Titans could never again threaten the cosmos, Zeus ordered them bound in chains of unbreakable adamantine. They were dragged from the ruined slopes of Mount Othrys and cast down into the very abyss they had used to imprison their own brethren. Down into the suffocating darkness of Tartarus they fell, locked away behind the massive bronze gates. To ensure they would never escape, Zeus appointed the Hecatoncheires, the monsters they had once despised, to stand as their eternal guards in the dark. Yet not all the Titans were cast into the abyss. For Atlas, the mighty general who had led the Titan armies in battle, Zeus devised a punishment far more poetic and far more agonizing. Atlas was dragged to the western edge of the world, where the sky met the earth. There, he was forced to hoist the entire weight of the celestial sphere onto his shoulders. He would stand there for eternity, his muscles screaming, his bones grinding, tasked with keeping the heavens from crashing down upon the earth. A living pillar, holding up the very sky, ruled by the god who had defeated him. With the old regime vanquished and imprisoned, a strange, profound silence settled over the ruined earth. The smoke began to clear, revealing a sky that was, for the first time in 10 years, calm and blue. The cosmos was in desperate need of order, of a new structure to replace the chaotic brutality of the past. The three victorious brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, met upon the shattered peaks of the world to divide the spoils of their monumental victory. They did not fight for supremacy. Instead, they chose to draw lots from a helmet, trusting in the ancient magic of fate to decide their domains. Hades drew the first lot. To him fell the underworld, the vast, shadowy realm of the dead beneath the earth. He would become the silent, wealthy king of the afterlife, ruling over the souls of all who perished. Poseidon drew the second lot. To him fell the sea. He became the lord of the oceans, the rivers, and the deep, mysterious trenches, commanding the storms and the creatures of the deep with his mighty trident. And finally, Zeus drew the third lot. To him fell the sky, the heavens, and the absolute sovereignty over the cosmos. He became the king of gods and men, the supreme authority of the universe. The earth itself and the grand peak of Mount Olympus would be common ground to all three. But it was Zeus who would sit upon the highest throne. He had started as a secret, a desperate hope hidden in a dark cave on a wild island. He had grown into a rebel, a cunning infiltrator who poisoned a tyrant. He had become a warrior, a leader who forged alliances with monsters and wielded the raw power of the storm. And now, as he took his seat upon the gleaming throne of Mount Olympus, holding the crackling master bolt in his hand, he was a king. The Titanomachy was over. The age of brutal, primordial chaos had been burned away by the lightning. From the ashes of a shattered world, a new era dawned. It would be an age of laws, of civilization, of heroes and monsters, governed by the watchful eyes of the gods above. The heavens had a new master, and his name would be whispered in reverence and terror until the end of time. The reign of Zeus had begun.